Now for the golden rule for today. This is the fifth golden rule. My conscientious self, break not your word of honor, whatever may befall. Break not your word of honor, whatever may befall. Expressions in English, and indeed in all languages, often convey more than one originally notices. Consider this expression, to break your word of honor. Break, to break. What does that mean? Yes, it means to go back on one's word, but here the expression is to break something. And it suggests that one's word of honor, one's pledge, one's vow, one's oath is something, a thing. It's something that can be shattered. It's a thing that possesses integrity. It has a certain form, it has a certain substance. And so to violate that oath is actually to shatter something. It may not be something visible, but it's a thing that one has created by the act of making the vow, by saying those words and investing one's soul into the words. When one gives one's promise, one is entrusting one's soul into a vessel that one creates, that promise. It's something one has created. And then it's held in your hands. Will you uphold it or will you shatter it? So these words, this contemplation reminds us of the significance of giving one's word. It's not something to be done lightly. If one gives one's word lightly, here and there, in this little matter and that little matter, and keeps changing one's mind and breaking one's word, what is one's word? It has no significance, it has no weight, it doesn't carry one's soul. So the whole endeavor of ensouling speech depends upon the sanctity with which one treats these crystalline objects, these vessels that one creates through one's giving of one's word. The more that one tends to these vessels, cares for them, upholds them, the more sacredness, the more honesty, the more integrity there will be in the whole sphere of one's speech as an extension of one's soul. You know, the soul manifests in an infant when the infant starts to talk. Something profoundly sacred. The human being is called the nafsa natiqa. Our speech is a primary channel of soul. And when we consecrate it to truth, then our speech is hallowed and we can live a life of integrity and dignity. But breaking that word really is shattering something that's a treasure. And maybe we would break an oath in order to gain some kind of temporary advantage, to gain some kind of tangible benefit, some kind of worldly benefit. But is it worth that loss of the integrity of one's speech? So this golden rule is very much in alignment with the sacred occasion which is coming now just tomorrow, which is the occasion of Ashura, the 10th of Muharram, which is the observation of it's an observation that ultimately dates back to the liberation of the Israelites from bondage and the parting of the sea, when those who pursued the Israelites who had obtained freedom from slavery, how all of nature received the divine command to help them in their liberation, and the sea parted. So the 10th of Muharram, the day of Ashura, is traced back to that great event of freedom. But it's also associated with another event which parallels the quest for justice and freedom of Moses, peace be upon him, namely the quest for justice on the part of Imam Hussain. May God bless and keep him, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Imam Hussein's story was a great inspiration to Mahatma Gandhi, who in turn was a great inspiration to Dr. Martin Luther King. So the example, the spiritual example of Imam Hussain has resounded down the centuries and has certainly helped to shape the freedom movement in this country. Imam Hussain was beloved of his grandfather. He was loved by the Prophet, who used to hold him on his shoulders and play with him with great fondness. And the Prophet said, Hussainu minni wa anna minna al-Hussain. He said that Hussain is from me and I am from Hussain, envisaging the great spiritual destiny that awaited Hazrat Hussain. And in the course of time, that great revelation which the Prophet brought came into confrontation with forces of injustice and tyranny, and the endeavor which one sees in the histories of all religions, the endeavor to seize upon something pure and co-opt it for impure, or at the very least purely worldly purposes. So there was already a struggle in the first years after the death of the Prophet, a struggle for the soul of the revelation, and the Ahlul Bayt, the family of the Prophet, were guardians of the inner science of the revelation, the true meaning of it, and had to contend with the political and imperialistic and mercantile interests that sought their own ends. And the result was increasing tension and conflict, which tragically came to a head in the month of Muharram, in the lifetime of Hussain, when the Caliph Muawiyah died, having designated his son Yazid as his successor, and when Yazid pressured Hussain to give his allegiance to Muawiyah, which he couldn't in good conscience do. So this brings us to the question of the giving of oaths. In essence, Muawiyah was demanding an oath from Hussein, and Hussein wasn't willing to give an oath even under duress, under threat of death. He wasn't willing to make a promise that wasn't true. And so he refused. And it was then that the people of Kufa, a garrison town in Iraq, who had great veneration for Hazrat Ali, may God bless and keep him, and afterward Hazrat Hussein, invited Hazrat Hussein to come and be their Imam. And so Hussein answered that call and was on his way together with a group of mostly his family members, some 70 companions, traveling through the desert. And meanwhile, the governor who was deputized by Muawiyah, Ubaidullah, he put great pressure on the people of Kufa to renounce the leadership of Imam Hussain and turn from him, otherwise they would face great reprisals. They had urged him, pleaded to him to come and be their leader, and now, having given that invitation, they felt duress and no longer didn't withstand the pressure, and so failed to materialize their support to Imam Hussain just as he was crossing the desert, approaching Kufa. And it happened then that an army sent by the Umayyads came to stop Hussein from reaching Kufa, and cornered Hussein and his family in a position in which they couldn't draw water from the Euphrates, and their supply of water was dwindling. And this small group of 70-some were confined in this hopeless position without water in the desert, confronted by an army of more than 1,000, preventing their further progress and shutting off all means of egress. And so it went on for a number of days that they were trapped in a more and more desperate situation. And water supplies dwindled to nothing. And it was then that the general of the Umayyads, Hur was his name, Hur bin Yazid, he had a change of heart. He was sent out because he took his commands because he had been sent out, but seeing the nobility of the Prophet's own family there, the one who as an infant had rode on the back of his grandfather, who had been so loved, who had received the spiritual teaching and culture of the Prophet. What had happened now in the name of the Prophet's revelation? His own family was on the brink of being slaughtered. For what purpose? For purely from tyranny, the most malicious of motives, the motive of the raw pursuit of power. How could this general who was appointed to apprehend Hussein, he saw I'm on the wrong side of this conflict. He had in his control this massive army, but he switched sides. He went and joined that beleaguered family because he knew the family of the Prophet will die here. But this isn't the end. The end is in the hereafter. The end is in the great reckoning. And it's then that every decision, every command, every heeding of a command will be revealed in the light of the divine knowledge. So he switched sides and joined, having been the commander of the army, he was now a beleaguered follower of the camp of Hussain. And finally the onslaught came and the arrows hurled through the sky. And it was a wholesale slaughter. Even the young ones, even the children were slaughtered mercifully, and the sand was stained with blood. The women and some children survived and lived to tell of the day, but Imam Hussain and his companions gave up their spirits instead of succumbing to complicity with the force of tyranny that was showing itself at that time. They took their stand, they were ready to die, and they gave their lives. And so they've become an example to us, an example to live in fullest integrity, to sacrifice one's wealth, to sacrifice one's health, to sacrifice one's very life if necessary, but never to succumb to the imperious demands of tyranny and treachery, but live the truth, the highest truth, the noblest, the purest truth one knows, and know that life goes on. This is not the end. So in a sense, the martyrdom of Imam Hussain, as tragic, as terrible as it is, it's also a joyous day. Maulana Rumi calls it a day of joy, because there was freedom for Imam Hussein's soul in that act of self-giving, which was so noble and which anticipates and energizes the acts of self-giving of all of the martyrs subsequently down through history, who have given of themselves, who have given themselves for truth, for love. And it opens up this legacy of generosity and mercy and forgiveness and grace and purity that cannot fail to inspire us and becomes a bulwark against the creeping injustice, the creeping tyrannical selfishness which otherwise would whelm this world if it were not for this vital spirit of loving self-giving. So there's joy in this, and a sign also of the mystic path of giving oneself entirely over to God, dissolving away all impediments and opening oneself up to the vast, infinite, pure light of the most merciful, the most compassionate.